Welcome back, friend. I invite you to sit back with me. Relax. Take a deep breath. Let the sound of the crackling fire seep into your ears. Feel the warm fuzzy bliss tickle your heart. It's time for another story. Let's begin. I've never been a fan of Mother's Day or Father's Day. Everyone knows they are just a scam for the greeting card companies to make money. Yet my mother always thrusts guilt upon me if I don't get her a card and a nice little present to go with it. I know, I sound like a rotten son for saying it, but I get the card and the gift solely that I do not feel the guilt that goes otherwise. You see, me and my parents do not see eye to eye on many issues, our indifferences causing a huge rift in our relationship with each other. One of many such indifferences which led me to experiencing the trip report I am writing about now. Don't get me wrong, I do love my parents dearly, but sometimes their overbearing love for me becomes a bit too much, and a little bit of escapism is needed. This was one of those nights, escapism inside the mini noodle. I won't go into much detail of what set off our usual bickering. Basically, it was at a family reunion in which I was accused of not spending enough time with the relatives. I tried defending myself. Mom got a little too worked up about it and brought up other degrading insults into the mix. I grew silent and endured the heated drive back home, where upon returning, I swiftly left in my car to get away. I went to a friend's place where a few of my buddies were lounging, smoking weed and drinking Coronas. The laid-back environment calmed me down significantly, and soon I forgot all about that afternoon, smoking a few bowls and watching a movie on satellite TV. My friends were good company, but unfortunately I am the only night owl in the group. I was able to keep my friends conscious until about 2 a.m., when they all agreed it was late and parted ways. I was still unwilling to go back home just yet, so I searched for another thing to do. I then remembered my connect and good friend T would be off work around 3:30. If I could just kill time until then, I could meet up with him and then sample some more of his latest supply inside the mini noodle. The mini noodle was my sanctuary, a place to kick back and forget about the real world when the going got tough. It simply was an old shed placed out in my friend's backyard, which was retrofitted with couches, black lights and a cheap stereo. It was designed to resemble a chill-out room from a rave where me and my friends could unwind and do our drugs. We could get fairly noisy out there and the neighbors wouldn't complain. My friends' neighbors had their own reasons for not wanting to attract the cops. Besides, it wasn't like we were out there every night anyway. The chill room was built so that we could throw a couple of our own mini raves at the residence, but for the most part, it was still just a shed that held couches and some various paraphernalia, as well as some tagged glow-in-the-dark paint on the walls. It got its name, the Mini Noodle, through the rave venue where I had first met my friends. The Noodle Factory it was called, nestled around a few ghetto parts of West Oakland. I remembered helping my friends paint the shed when it was getting its new look, and the paint job resembled part of one of the rooms inside the Noodle Factory, which happened to be as cramped and hot as the shed we were painting. One of us pointed this fact out, and we lovingly christened its name, ironically, through our displeasure of partying at the stuffy Noodle Factory. I loved the mini noodle, it was my home away from home. Even when the mini raves stopped happening, I would usually be out there at least once a weekend, smoking a bowl, puffing nitrous, listening to some music or popping a pill. I put that place to good use, and intended to do so again tonight. I managed spending the next hour and a half driving around aimlessly through town, getting food to eat and loitering outside a few places. I found my friend T outside the sports bar he worked at, picked him up and headed to my other friend's place that housed the mini noodle. He was my friend's brother, and was living with him at the time, so he was basically getting a free ride home. I asked if he had any more of the stuff in his possession. He said yes. I smiled. Now for most people, unwinding with a smoke and a few beers would be enough. For me, I felt a little change was in order. I needed something new on the menu, and this time, ecstasy and ketamine were the special combo of the day. I still had a green music note left over from a party 2 months ago. I had only done K once, and that was a few days ago when T had given me a free sample after scoring some from a rave he went to last week. It was nothing like I had ever tried before. This time, I wanted to see what K and E could do together. After all, it wasn't like ketamine was easy to find in this town, so now that it was available, I might as well do some experimenting. T had done that combination before, but wasn't too impressed with it. But he was curious to see what it would do to me. So was I. I popped the green music note at 4. I normally wouldn't drop so late at night, but these circumstances called for it. I've had an experience with green music notes before. They wouldn't start working till an hour and a half after consumption, the longest I've ever waited for a pill to hit. But once they hit, they worked well, and would leave off some visuals once you came down. Naturally, I wanted to wait an hour and a half before doing a bag of K, so that both drugs would be working in sync. After all, it only takes about 10 minutes for the dissociative effects of K to kick in, and lasts for about an hour. Yes, I had researched the drug fairly well, and timed the duration on my cell phone when I did it a few nights ago. So me and T chilled inside the mini noodle, all black lights turned on, passing the bong back and forth, smoking some mediocre weed and talking about parties past. At 40 minutes past, T could not wait any longer. He pulled out a small red baggie and a cut straw and snorted up the pre-measured 100 milligrams of ketamine hydrochloride inside. He sighed in delight and passed another bag and the straw to me, but I refused. My roll wasn't kicking in yet, I was only stoned and tired, but I was also growing anxious. Just my luck to be left with one pill that took so ridiculously long to hit. T laughed and played some happy hardcore. Not my type of music to listen to when taking a dissociative/psychedelic, I much prefer progressive house or psytrance during a trip, but it seemed to make T feel much more at home. I wasn't going to argue this time. I loved happy hardcore when I was rolling anyway, and hopefully I will be rolling soon. 50 minutes passed and still nothing but baked thoughts and a slight urge to dance. I had still been talking to T about various things, but the last question he answered, he seemed to get stuck, and stared at me for a few minutes before laughing. I could tell the K was getting hold of him, and I wanted to stay somewhere around his level. So when he offered me the bag and straw the second time around, I took it willingly. I emptied the bag at 450 with just a few strong whiffs, feeling like a disco stud. K goes up the nostrils so much smoother than cocaine. There's no numbness, no breathing out of only one nostril, just a slight tingle to it and it's gone. I poked my finger in the bag, gathered a few more particles and rubbed it on my gums. There was no significance to it, I was only being silly. It got a few more disjointed laughs from T. 5 minutes later he gets up, and wobbles over to the couch to lie down. I say wobble, because walking becomes difficult once K works its magic. It's much better to lie down anyway, because having to stand can become quite distracting from the trip. At 5 a.m. I found myself getting stuck as well. Basically it's just looking around the room and having my vision stop at one random place for a few minutes before I realize I've been staring at nothing for, how long? It becomes difficult telling time too. I could now feel the room slowly start to tilt from side to side, as if a giant was outside the mini noodle, rocking the place back and forth. I get up out of my chair and wave my arms in the air, struggling for balance. My spinal cord refuses to snap upright, so I wobble over to my couch, hunchbacked. I glance over to my right and T is already K'd out, rocking out to the cheesy riffs of the hardcore. I drop on my couch like dead weight, rocking my head back and forth, becoming amazed at how heavy it feels. And there we lie, on our respective couches, for the next 40 minutes. I check my cell phone here and there to check the time, but soon the LED panel becomes too bright for me to read the display. So I lie there doing nothing, zoning in and out and having scattered thoughts that I forget about a few minutes after. At 5:30 T gets up to change CDs with another happy hardcore album. He seems to be fairly sober now, and takes another rip out of the bong once the new CD plays. I'm coming out of my K trip as well, with nothing remarkable to really remember, much to my disappointment. Just as I thought, I had taken the K too early, and now I started to feel my jaw tighten up and the familiar MDMA-induced feelings tingle around my mind and body. Life can be so cruel sometimes, or can it? I turn to look at T with a slight smirk on my face, and ask him, "Want to go halves on another bag?" T never hesitated. 5:35 a.m., me and T take in another 50 milligrams, roughly, of our beloved substance. Neither one of us had fully come down off the first bump yet, so there would still be some K running in our system as the second bump came in. Before I lose my ability to walk again, I cash out what was left in the bong, then promptly return to my seat. The E was coming on quite nicely, but the jaw clench was slightly distracting. If only I had some gum to chew. There was a half-full bottle of Aquafina on the table, so I drank some of that to keep myself hydrated. 10 minutes later I'm wobbling back over to the couch Notre Dame style, this time noticing a difference in the intensity of the influence. My body had become dead weight again, but this time I had much more feeling. I could feel the individual hairs on my arms nestle around, and the itchy fabric of the couch had become softer. I could now feel all the different fibers rest around my skin. How strange it was, to feel all your muscles in your body become 10 times heavier, and yet have elevated feelings in touch. 20 minutes after the second K bump go by, and I can feel my body start to sweat a little. I try pulling my cell phone out to look at the time again, and I see that my phone had bent in an arc to the right. I now had to tilt my head to read the display, and even then my mind couldn't make sense of what it read. It looked familiar, but distant, unimportant. I throw the phone somewhere on the couch and run my fingers through my hair. Oh God, did it feel good, even though my hair felt more like a cheap wig, it still felt good to touch it. I look up at the ceiling, and all the normal pock marks and scratches are slowly moving forward. It became more like a conveyor belt than a ceiling, as the dents and marks would move forward, then disappear somehow, and come back to its original place, moving forward again. Soon the dents and marks began forming shapes of their own, moving on this upside-down conveyor belt. I began to feel like Alice, plummeting down the rabbit hole, and as soon as I thought that, behold, a half-visible face of the Cheshire Cat appeared to me, running along the conveyor belt. And as soon as I gasped in surprise, Cheshire grinned at me, before disappearing. Oh my God, it was happening. I was tripping out. I soon took my focus out of the conveyor belt ceiling, and looked around all the tagged, glow-in-the-dark art covering the walls. It was all mostly neon green, but I saw that the letters were taking on a life of their own. They were becoming 3D. They could bend and twist around. They could stretch and shrink. They wanted to move, and this time the natural laws of the earth couldn't stop them. The dancing letters became pleasant to look at, and I could feel my eyes rolling back in their sockets as the letters darted back and forth across the walls. They started moving across the walls and floor so quickly that soon I became convinced that I was stuck inside the matrix and could see all the green code scrolling by. It was a light show like no other, and I was loving it. Here and there I would try to grab one of the letters as they passed by, but my arms would not work right. It kept feeling like they would grow out 20 feet in length, and then I would have a hard time trying to ravel it back to its original length, much like winding up a garden hose. It was too weird of a feeling, so I dropped them back on the couch in defeat. I looked back up at the ceiling to marvel at the matrix code, but it had disappeared. The letters had gone back to their original places, but they looked foreign. I could still not understand what they read. I saw a little black speck walk across one of the letters. It looked like a small spider. As soon as I thought that, a giant glimmering silver web filled across my vision, and to my surprise, a silky strand of webbing had attached itself on every object in the room, including me. Seeing as I hate spiders, I did what I could to remove the strand of webbing off of myself, as hard as that was to do. As soon as it left me, I felt a cold shock run through my body, as if I had been cut off from something vital. I began wondering if perhaps that what I saw was the web of life, and everything alive was attached to it, and to be cut off from it could only mean death. No, that doesn't make sense. I am tripping, that is all. The air condensed all around me. The light bounced off the air in strange ways, making the air appear solid. What kind of solid reflects light in that way? Glass. Oh no, the air has turned into glass. I am suffocating. I could no longer breathe. All I could feel were sharp pieces of glass ripping into my lungs. How could this have happened? There is no glass, you are tripping. Somehow, as chemically altered as my senses were, there was still this tiny, sane voice in my mind, reminding me of what I had taken. As soon as I remembered that I had taken K, the air became normal again. But as poor as my short-term memory was that night, I would forget the voice, and start seeing things again. The happy hardcore still playing in the background now sounded like it was slowed down, like it had become trance instead. The layers of sound in the tracks were no longer in sync, and so parts of the song would sound off. One lyric sprung into my mind, "Jump onto your feet," that sounded like a good idea. But how did one jump onto their feet? That required movement of some sort, right? Movement that I could no longer make. I still wanted to dance to the music, but I couldn't figure how to go about that anymore. Perhaps, if gravity offered a little assistance. And that's when the world tilted. I felt suddenly as if the couch had attached its bottom end onto the left wall, and there was all this gravity that was now pushing on my left side, wanting me to fall on the floor, and yet somehow there I remained, glued onto the couch, which was now glued onto the wall. And from there, fabrics began appearing everywhere. Various multi-patterned fabrics, as if they had been ripped from some larger material and were now being draped and layered together in random places. Soon the fabrics were everywhere, polka dots, stripes, labyrinth shapes, and others in various degrees of opacity, forming a huge fabric montage in front of my very eyes. I didn't know what the hell was going on anymore. And when it looked like I would now be suffocated from pounds of fabrics thrown on my body, everything went back to normal. The couch was back on the floor, the glow in the dark art was understandable once again, everything was back in its place. I must have blacked out. The hardcore CD had ended and T seemed to have fallen asleep. I still felt very much cracked out and tired, and my jaw ached. I searched around the couch and found my phone. The display read 7:14 a.m. Wow, it was already morning. I was too tired to drive home, and too cracked out to sleep, so I laid there on the couch, for another hour, thinking of the things I had just experienced. Gradually I'm able to sleep again. After that night I decided to stay away from the Special K for a little while. I had read about its psychedelic effects, and after trying acid and shrooms, I knew I wanted to give this drug a shot. It did not disappoint, it was so radically different from the other psychedelics, it still amazes me to recall the things I saw inside the mini noodle that night. Not that I could discern any enlightenment from it, but an interesting experience nonetheless. Just one of many late nights, in the mini noodle. Oh yes, and I did get around to giving my mom her gift and card for Mother's Day. Business as usual. And that's that. I thank you for listening. Before you go, I just wanted to tell you that I love you. Just in case nobody ever told you that today. Now, friend. Good night.